Before we begin, I ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you these untold stories of the famous. The iron was cold beneath my calloused palms as I gripped the barbell at 5 in the morning. The gym in Santa Monica still shrouded in darkness. October 1974. The Mr. Olympia competition was 8 weeks away, and I could feel the weight of expectation crushing down on me harder than any barbell I'd ever lifted. Franco Columbu was already there, of course, moving through his warm-up routine with that methodical precision that had made him my closest training partner and fiercest rival. "You look like shit, Arnold," Franco said in his thick Italian accent, not looking up from adjusting the plates on his squat bar. "When's the last time you slept?" I couldn't remember. The nights had become a blur of protein shakes, posing practice, and an obsessive study of every angle of my physique in the mirror. 2 hours here, maybe 3 there. That's all the sleep my mind would allow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sergio Oliva's back, those impossibly wide lats that had dominated the stage for years. "Sleep is for people who aren't trying to make history," I replied, chalking my hands. The powder clung to my forearms, a reminder of the battles ahead. Those arms that had carried me from a small Austrian village to the pinnacle of bodybuilding. But were they enough? The truth was I was terrified. Not the kind of fear that paralyzes you, but the kind that eats away at your insides, making you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. I had won Mr. Olympia 4 times already, but each victory felt more fragile than the last. The sport was evolving, and despite Almi's success, I felt like I was standing still while the world moved forward around me. "There's someone I want you to meet," Franco said suddenly, his voice dropping to a whisper even though we were alone in the gym. "A scientist, Dr. Heinrich Mueller from East Germany. He has methods." The name hit me like a physical blow. East Germany. Even in the insular world of bodybuilding, we heard whispers about what was happening behind the Iron Curtain. Olympic athletes performing superhuman feats, breaking records that seemed impossible. "What kind of methods?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Franco glanced around the empty gym, then leaned closer. "Arnold, I've seen what this man does. It changes people, not always for the better." His worry was genuine, not theatrical. "He's working with elite athletes here in Los Angeles. But what he does?" Franco shook his head. "It's not natural." I set down the barbell and looked at my reflection in the mirror. 240 pounds of muscle, carved from years of relentless training and an almost religious devotion to perfection. But was it perfect? In the harsh fluorescent light, I could see every flaw, every area that could be improved. My chest needed more thickness. My legs lacked the separation that would make judges gasp. And my back. I needed something revolutionary if I was going to compete with Sergio. But it wasn't just about Sergio anymore. I could feel time itself becoming my enemy. At 27, he was no longer the young lion who had burst onto the scene. Younger competitors were studying my victories, learning from my techniques, and soon they would surpass me. The thought of becoming yesterday's champion made my stomach turn. "Tell me more," I said, hating myself for the words even as they left my mouth. Franco pulled out a small piece of paper from his gym bag, folded multiple times. On it was an address in Beverly Hills and a phone number written in precise Germanic handwriting. "He's expecting you," Franco said. "Today if you want." "But Arnold," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "What he does to the human body, it changes you. Forever." I stared at that piece of paper, feeling like I was looking at my own crossroads. The rational part of my mind, the part that had guided me from Austrian farm boy to Hollywood dreams, screamed warnings, but the competitor in me, the part that had never accepted second place in anything, was already reaching for the phone. The call was brief. Dr. Mueller's voice was clinical, emotionless, like he was discussing the weather rather than whatever experimental program he was running. He gave me an address and a time. 2 p.m. today. No discussion of what we would be doing, no explanation of methods or risks. One thing, his voice crackled through the phone line. "What we do is not for the weak-minded. I have broken men stronger than you, Mr. Schwarzenegger. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" The question hung in the air long after I hung up the phone. Certainty was a luxury I couldn't afford, not with the competition looming and my legacy on the line. I spent the morning training with an intensity that bordered on violence. Every set was a war against meow limitations, every rep a battle against the voice in my head that whispered I might not be good enough anymore. Franco watched me with growing concern, especially when I loaded the squat bar with more weight than I'd ever attempted before. "Arnold, that's 585 pounds, he said, moving to spot me. "You've never gone that heavy." "Today I do," I growled, ducking under the bar and feeling the steel bite into my trapezius muscles. The weight was crushing, but I drove up anyway, my vision tunneling as every fiber in my legs screamed in protest. At the top of the movement, I held the weight longer than necessary, savoring the pain because pain meant I was still pushing boundaries. When I racked the weight, Franco was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "What's happening to you?" he asked. "Evolution," I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. At 1:30 p.m., I found myself driving through the winding streets of Beverly Hills, the address burning in my pocket. The houses grew larger and more secluded as I climbed into the hills, eventually stopping at agate that looked like it belonged to a fortress rather than a residence. When I pressed the intercom button, that same clinical voice crackled through the speaker. "Mr. Schwarzenegger, you are punctual." "Good. Punctuality suggests discipline, and you will need discipline for what comes next." The gate opened with a mechanical whisper, revealing a driveway that curved through manicured grounds toward a house that looked more like a medical facility than a home. Clean lines, glass and steel, everything sterile and purposeful. Other expensive cars sat in the circular drive, evidence that other elite athletes had found their way to this place. Dr. Mueller met me at the front door. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the lean, efficient build that suggested he'd been an athlete himself. His handshake was firm but brief, and his eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, seemed to look right through me. "Welcome, Mr. Schwarzenegger," he said in an accent that was unmistakably German, though softened had been years in America. "I have been following your career with great interest. For Mr. Olympia titles, ice impressive, but I suspect you are not here because you are satisfied with impressive." He led me through a hallway lined with photographs. Olympic athletes, world record holders, faces I recognized from magazines and television. But something was off about the photos. The athletes looked different somehow, more intense, almost inhuman in their perfection. "My previous subjects," Dr. Mueller explained, noticing my stare. "Each one pushed beyond what they thought possible. The human body is capable of extraordinary adaptation, Mr. Schwarzenegger, but only when subjected to extraordinary stress." We entered what he called his consultation room, though it looked more like a medical lab. Machines I didn't recognize lined the walls, their purposes unclear but somehow menacing. Charts covered every available surface, showing muscle fiber compositions, hormone levels, neural pathways, a roadmap off human physiology that went far deeper than anything I'd studied. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to what looked like a medical examination chair. "Before we proceed, I must understand your current limitations and your willingness to transcend them." For the next hour, he put me through tests unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just measurements of strength and muscle mass, but psychological evaluations, pain tolerance assessments, questions about me family history, and my deepest fears. By the end, I felt like he knew more about me than I knew about myself. "Interesting," he said finally, reviewing his notes. "Your physical development is impressive, but you have significant untapped potential. Your nervous system efficiency could be doubled. Your hormone production optimized. Your muscle recruitment patterns completely restructured." He paused, fixing me with those colorless eyes. "But the process pushes the human body into crisis states that force rapid adaptation. Some athletes emerge transformed. Others," he shrugged, "others discover they were not as strong as they believed." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though my mouth was dry with anticipation and dread. Dr. Mueller smiled for the first time since I'd arrived, and it was not a reassuring expression. 6 weeks of physiological reconstruction, he said simply. Training methods that will either make you the greatest bodybuilder who ever lived or break you entirely. The choice, as they say, is yours. He slid consent forms across the desk, pages of medical terminology that basically said I understood it might die and wouldn't hold anyone responsible. My hand hovered over the pen, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the electric anticipation of a man standing at the edge of a cliff. But I couldn't bring myself to sign. Not yet. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like that 585-pound squat bar. This wasn't just about winning another competition. This was about discovering what lay beyond the boundaries of human potential, even if it killed me. In that moment, I thought about my father back in Austria, who had never understood my obsession with building my body into something beyond ordinary human limits. I thought about my mother, who worried that I was pushing myself too hard, too far. Most of all, I thought about the boy I had been, staring at muscle magazines and dreaming of becoming something more than human. I need the night to think about it, I said, though we both knew I had already made my decision. Dr. Mueller nodded, as if he had expected this. Very well. But understand, Mr. Schwarzenegger, what I offer is not available indefinitely. The window for this level of transformation closes after a certain age. Your window is closing now. He leaned back in his chair, those pale eyes never leaving mine. Tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. If you are here with those papers signed, we begin immediately. If not, I shrugged. Perhaps you were not as hungry for greatness as I believed. As I drove back down those winding Beverly Hills streets, the unsigned papers burning in my jacket pocket, I knew I was approaching the most dangerous crossroads of my life. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built, everything I had become, it all led to this moment. The question wasn't whether the training would be dangerous. The question was whether I was finally ready to discover what lay beyond the limits of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at those consent forms spread across my nightstand. The words blurred together, experimental protocols, potential permanent damage. By 3 a.m., I had read them so many times I could recite them from memory. At 4:30, I was already in my car, driving through empty Los Angeles streets. The city looked abandoned in the pre-dawn darkness. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my heart hammering, not from excitement, but from the dread you feel when you know you're about to step off a cliff. The signed paper sat folded in my jacket pocket, my signature scrawled in blue ink that had felt like blood. There had been a moment, around 2 a.m., when I'd almost torn them up, almost convinced myself that 4 Mr. Olympia titles were enough. But then I thought about Sergio leave on stage, and I knew I couldn't live with myself if I walked away. The gate to Dr. Mueller's compound opened before I even pressed the intercom, as if he'd been watching the road. The driveway seemed longer in the darkness, winding through shadows that could have hidden anything. When I parked, I noticed the other cars were gone. Apparently, whatever Dr. Mueller had planned for me required privacy. He met me at the door wearing what looked like surgical scrubs, pristine white against the darkness of the house. His pale eyes seemed to glow in the porch light as he extended his hand. Mr. Schwarzenegger, I confess, I was only 60% certain you would return. Most men, when faced with the reality of transformation, choose the comfort of their limitations. I pulled out the signed papers and handed them to him without a word. He glanced through them quickly, nodding at each signature like a banker approving a loan. Excellent. We have 6 weeks to restructure your neuromuscular system completely. Today, we establish your baseline and introduce your body to crisis state training. Follow me. He led me through corridors deeper into the house until we reached a steel door that required both AKI card and fingerprint scanner. Beyond it was a facility that made my skin crawl, traditional weights alongside machines that hummed with electrical energy, their purposes unclear but somehow threatening. This is where we rebuild you, Dr. Mueller said. Everything here forces your body beyond normal limits. Your system will be pushed into survival states that trigger growth nature never intended. He handed me a device that looked like a watch but felt heavier. This monitors everything: heart rate, temperature, neural activity. I need to see how your body responds to what we're about to do. As I strapped it on, numbers immediately appeared that meant nothing to me but seemed to fascinate him. Excellent baseline readings that will be changing all of this. Your nervous system shows typical limitations of conventional training. Most athletes use only 60% of their available muscle. We're going to teach your body to access everything. He gestured to what looked like a normal bench press, though cables and sensors disappeared into the ceiling. This doesn't just measure weight. It measures how efficiently your nerves command your muscles. The sensation will be intense. I lay down on the bench, gripping the bar. It felt normal enough, though I could sense electronics humming around me. The weight is your normal maximum. 405 pounds, Dr. Mueller said, holding what looked like a control device. But this system will stimulate your nervous system directly, forcing complete muscle recruitment. It will feel like lightning in your veins. I pressed the bar up from the rack and immediately knew something was wrong. The weight felt heavier, as if gravity itself had been amplified. But that wasn't the worst part. As I lowered the bar, electrical current shot through my chest like being struck from the inside. What the hell? The words died as every muscle in my chest contracted with inhuman force. It wasn't just lifting, it was like my muscles were being crushed and rebuilt simultaneously. Continue, Dr. Mueller commanded coldly. Your body is learning to access neural pathways that have never fired. The agony is temporary. Agony was right. The electrical stimulation made my muscles contract so violently I thought they might tear apart. But somehow, impossibly, the weight was moving. I was bench pressing 405 with a strength that felt alien, like something else was controlling my body. Tell me about your father, Dr. Mueller said suddenly as I struggled through the third rep, his voice scudding through my screams. Did he ever tell you that you would amount to nothing? The question hit harder than the electricity. Did he mock your dreams? Did he tell you that peasant boys from Austria don't become legends? The words triggered something primal. My arms drove the weight up as if it were empty, powered not just by the stimulation, but by a rage I'd buried for years. Good, Mueller observed, watching his screens. Anger increases your output by 40%. We learn to access this state at will. By the fifth rep, I was screaming, not from fear, but from the intensity of sensation. My muscles were firing with coordination I'd never experienced, but the electrical torture felt like being rebuilt from the inside out. Excellent. You're recruiting muscle fibers most men never touch. You're already operating at a level nature never intended. When I racked the weight, my entire upper body was shaking. Not from exhaustion, from something deeper. My nervous system felt rewired. I sat up, staring at my hands, which tingled with residual electricity. That's impossible, I whispered. I've never felt that strong. That was merely the beginning, Dr. Mueller smiled. We're going to force adaptations that would normally take years, compressing them into weeks. Your body will learn to operate at efficiency levels beyond human design. For the next 3 hours, he put me through exercises that shattered everything I knew about training. Squats while electrical currents forced inhuman muscle coordination. Deadlifts that somehow felt light despite impossible weight. Each movement accompanied by that alien stimulation that made me feel simultaneously godlike and terrified. But it was the psychological assault that truly broke me down. Mueller didn't just supervise. He probed every wound, every insecurity, every childhood trauma. Your father never believed in you, did he? He asked as I struggled through squats that should have crushed me. Even now, he's probably telling people his son is just playing with weights. The words made me drive up with violent force, as if the weight were my father's disapproval itself. You're afraid you're getting old, he continued during deadlifts. Afraid the young lions will tear you apart. Afraid you'll be forgotten like every other champion who couldn't accept his time was over. Each psychological jab triggered hormonal cascades that enhanced my performance. He was teaching my body to feed on pain, on rage, on every dark emotion I'd spent years suppressing. Does it humiliate you that Sergio's back is still better than yours? That men half your age are already studying your weaknesses. Stop. I growled, but the anger made me stronger. The weight moved like it was nothing. Or are you afraid that even with all this, you still won't be enough? That you'll always be the Austrian farm boy pretending to be a champion? By the end of the session, I was destroyed in ways I'd never experienced. Not just physically exhausted, but mentally and emotionally stripped bare. Dr. Mueller led me to what looked like a medical recovery room. Recovery is crucial, he explained, inserting in for that burned going in. This solution will accelerate your body's adaptive responses. You'll sleep here while your system integrates today's trauma. The four made me feel strange, exhausted and euphoric simultaneously. My muscles, which should have been screaming, felt oddly energized. Sleep now, Dr. Mueller said, dimming the lights. When you wake, we'll see what you've become. I drifted into something between sleep and consciousness. I could feel my body changing, muscles repairing, growing, my entire system rebuilding according to some new blueprint. In my dreams, I was lifting impossible weights, my body operating with mechanical precision. But there was something unsettling about the transformation, something that suggested I was losing pieces of myself even as I gained in human capabilities. When I woke 4 hours later, I felt fundamentally altered. Not refreshed, transformed. Movements that should have been stiff and sore felt fluid and powerful. Dr. Mueller was waiting with his clipboard. How do you feel? I stood and immediately realized something was wrong. My legs felt springy, responsive in ways they never had. My chest and shoulders, which should have been devastated, felt ready for more punishment. I searched for words. Like I could lift a building. Your recovery markers are unprecedented. Muscle synthesis is occurring at rates I've never recorded. Your growth hormone levels are 5 times normal. He made notes, then looked at me with those colorless eyes. Would you like to test your new capabilities? He led me back to the bench press. The weight had been increased to 455 pounds, 50 more than I'd ever attempted. This should be impossible, Dr. Mueller said matter-of-factly. Your previous maximum was 405. This weight should crush you. I lay down, gripped the bar, and knew he was wrong. The 455 felt manageable. When I pressed it up, it moved smoothly, as if I'd been lifting this weight for years. But as I completed the rep, I caught my reflection in a mirrored wall, and what I saw made my blood freeze. My muscles looked different, more defined, more separated, but somehow unnatural. The veins were more prominent, the definition more extreme than should have been possible in 4 hours. I racked the weight and sat up, staring at my arms. They looked like they belonged to someone else, someone whose body operated by different rules. What's happening to me? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Dr. Mueller's smile reached his eyes for the first time. You're becoming what you always knew you could be. The question is, are you prepared for what that transformation will cost you? As I stared at my reflection, I realized I no longer recognized the man looking back. For the first time, I wasn't sure if what I saw in the mirror was me or the creation of Dr. Mueller. And we were only one day into the program. By the end of the second week, I was lifting weights that shouldn't have been possible for a human being. 515 pounds on the bench press, 725 on the squat. Numbers that made Franco stare at me like I'd grown a second head when I casually mentioned them during our regular training session at Gold's. That's impossible, Arnold, he said, setting down his dumbbells. You've gained 40 pounds on your bench in 2 weeks. Show me. I loaded the bar with my previous maximum, 455, and pressed it for 12 clean reps like it was an empty bar. Franco's face went pale. The entire gym had gone quiet, watching something that defied everything they understood about human strength. Ow! Franco whispered. I shrugged, but inside I was as stunned as he was. The transformation was accelerating beyond even Dr. Mueller's predictions. Every day brought new impossibilities. Recovery times that had once taken days now took hours. Muscle definition that appeared overnight. Strength gains that violated every principle of exercise science. But Franco was right to look scared. Because I was scared too. The changes weren't just physical. 3 days earlier, I'd woken up to find blood on my pillow, thick, dark blood that had poured from my nose while I slept. When I mentioned it to Dr. Mueller, he'd merely adjusted something on his computer and told me it was neural adaptation overflow. Whatever that meant. The mood swings were worse. 1 minute, I felt invincible, like I could conquer the world with my bare hands. The next, I was consumed by rage, so pure it felt like swallowing fire. Yesterday, a photographer at Muscle Beach had asked me to pose, and I'd nearly thrown him into the ocean for interrupting my workout. The violence of my reaction had shocked even me. "You're different," Franco said as we walked to our cars after the session. "Something's wrong, isn't it?" I wanted to tell him everything. About Dr. Mueller's facility, about the electrical stimulation that felt like being rebuilt from the inside out, about the injections that made my veins burn and my muscles swell. But every time I tried to form the words, they died in my throat. "I'm just focused," I said instead. "The competition is only 4 weeks away." Franco grabbed my arm, and I nearly broke his wrist before I caught myself. The speed and violence off me reaction terrified us both. "Jesus, Arnold," he breathed, backing away. "What the hell was that?" "I'm sorry," I said, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears, deeper, more aggressive. "I didn't mean to." "You almost crushed my arm," Franco said, staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Your eyes, they looked completely black for a second." That night, alone in my apartment, I stood naked in front of the mirror and tried to recognize myself. My body had become something from a nightmare or a dream. I couldn't decide which. Muscle striations so deep they looked carved into stone. Veins that stood out like cables under my skin. Definition so extremite looked surgical. But it was my face that disturbed me most. My features had somehow become more angular, more predatory. My jaw looked heavier, my brow more prominent. Even my hair seemed darker, though that might have been the lighting. When I smiled, which I rarely did anymore, my teeth looked sharper. The phone rang, interrupting my inspection. Dr. Mueller's voice was as clinical as ever. "How are you feeling tonight, Mr. Schwarzenegger?" "Like a monster," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "Interesting. The psychological integration phase is proceeding faster than anticipated. Are you experiencing any episodes of temporal displacement?" "What?" "Blackouts. Gaps in memory. Moments where you find yourself somewhere without remembering how you got there." I thought about this afternoon when I'd somehow ended up in the Santa Monica Mountains with no memory of driving there. I'd been standing on a cliff, staring down at the city, my hands clenched into fists so tight my knuckles had gone white. "Maybe," I admitted. "Excellent. This indicates that the neural restructuring is reaching deeper brain centers. We'll adjust tomorrow's protocol accordingly." "What exactly are you doing to me?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "I'm giving you what you asked for," Dr. Mueller said. "The question is, are you strong enough to hand light?" The next morning session was the most brutal yet. Dr. Mueller had introduced new elements, lights that strobed at specific frequencies while I lifted, sounds that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my skull, and injections that made my entire nervous system feel like it was on fire. "Your brain is remarkably adaptive," he observed as I deadlifted 800 pounds while electrical current coursed through my body. "Most subjects experience a complete neural breakdown by this point. Beauty integrating the modifications beautifully." "What modifications?" I gasped between reps. "We're optimizing your neurotransmitter production, restructuring your pain processing pathways, and enhancing your aggression responses. Essentially, we're removing the biological limiters that prevent humans from accessing their full potential." The weight felt light in my hands, but something was wrong with my vision. The edges of my sight were darkening, and I could see strange patterns dancing in my peripheral vision, geometric shapes that pulsed with the rhythm of my heartbeat. "You're turning me into something that isn't human," I said. "I'm turning you into something better than human," Dr. Mueller corrected. "The question is whether your mind can survive the transition." During the recovery phase, as foreign chemicals coursed through my fore, I drifted into something that wasn't quite sleep. I found myself in landscapes that couldn't exist, gyms where the weights defy gravity, mirrors that showed me as something with too many muscles and eyes that glowed like coals. In these dreams, I was lifting impossible weights while crowds of people with blurred faces chanted my name. But when I looked down at my hands, they were clawed and scaled like a reptile's. I woke screaming. Fascinating, Dr. Mueller said, studying his monitors. Your REM patterns indicate you're processing the transformation on a subconscious level. The nightmares should subside once your new neural pathways fully integrate. I don't want to integrate, I said, pulling out the 4. I want to stop this. For the first time since I'd met him, Dr. Mueller's composure cracked slightly. Stop? Mr. Schwarzenegger, you're 3 weeks from the most important competition of your life. You're lifting weights that would make Olympic champions weep with envy. Your physique has transcended every natural limitation. And you want to stop. He leaned closer, those pale eyes boring into mine. Do you know what you'll become if you stop now? A broken man whose body will collapse like a house of cards. The modifications we've made require constant reinforcement. Without the treatments, your nervous system will burn out, your muscles will atrophy, and your mind. He smiled that terrible smile. Well, let's just say that retreat is not an option. That evening, I went to dinner with Franco and a few other bodybuilders, desperate for some connection to my old life. But everything felt wrong. The conversation seemed stupid and trivial. When they complained about being sore from workouts, I wanted to scream at them about real pain. When they discussed training techniques, I felt contempt for their primitive understanding of human potential. You're not eating, Franco observed, looking at my untouched plate. Food had become irrelevant. Dr. Mueller's injections provided all the nutrients my transformed body needed. Normal food tasted like cardboard and made me nauseous. I'm not hungry, I said. When's the last time you ate actual food? He pressed. I couldn't remember. Time had become fluid, marked only by training sessions and recovery periods. Days blurred together in a haze of electrical stimulation and chemical enhancement. You look sick, said Lou Ferrigno, studying my face with concern. Your skin is gray, and you've lost weight in your face even though your body is huge. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, where the mirror showed me the truth they could see but had been denying. My skin did look gray, almost ashen. My cheeks were sunken despite my muscular gains. Dark circles ringed my eyes, which seemed to have taken on an unnatural brightness. But worse than my appearance was the way I felt about their concern. Instead of gratitude for friends who cared about me, I felt only irritation and contempt. They were weak, limited by their human frailties, and I was beyond them now. When I returned to the table, I could barely tolerate their presence. Their voices seemed too loud, their movements too slow, their concerns too petty. I made excuses and left early, driving through the night to DR. Mueller's facility, where I belonged. You're evolving faster than anticipated, Dr. Mueller said when I arrived, unscheduled. The psychological separation from your former self is a necessary part of the process. You can't become superhuman while clinging to human attachments. I don't recognize myself anymore, I said. Good. The man you were could never have achieved what you're capable of now. That man was weak, limited, ordinary. What you're becoming is extraordinary. He led me to a new room I hadn't seen before, where a single mirror covered an entire wall. Look at yourself, he commanded. What I saw was magnificent and terrifying. My physique had transcended every boundary I'd ever imagined. Muscle mass that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Definition so extreme it looked like Miskin had been shrink-wrapped on a living marble. Vascularity that made my body look like an anatomical diagram. But there was something else in the reflection, something in my eyes that wasn't quite human anymore, a cold intelligence that felt predatory, calculating. When I flexed, the movement was too fluid, too controlled, like a machine designed for destruction. You're beautiful, Dr. Mueller whispered. A perfect fusion of human potential and scientific enhancement. In 1 week, you'll step on that stage, and they'll see what a real champion looks like. I wanted to feel pride, but all I felt was a cold satisfaction. The man I'd been, the one who'd worried about Franco's approval, who'd cared about friendship and human connection, was gone. What remained was something designed for victory at any cost. What happens after the competition? I asked. Dr. Mueller's smile widened. That depends on how much further you want to evolve. 3 nights later, I was posing in my apartment, practicing my routine, when something unprecedented happened. As I hit a front double bicep pose, the mirror on my bedroom wall cracked. Not from impact, but from the sheer density of muscle I was displaying. The glass spider-webbed outward from where my reflection had been, as if reality itself couldn't contain what I'd become. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that as the mirror shattered, for just a moment, I saw something else in the fragments. Not my face, but something with eyes like burning coals and a smile full of too many teeth. I blinked and it was gone. But the mirror remained shattered, and I could taste copper in my mouth. When I touched my lips, my fingers came away bloody. Standing there in the ruins of my reflection, surrounded by shards of broken glass, I finally understood what Dr. Mueller had been trying to tell me. I wasn't becoming a better version of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was becoming something that had never been human at all. Today we achieve godhood, Dr. Mueller announced as I entered the facility for what he called the final phase. Or we discover you were never worthy of it. The laboratory had been transformed into something resembling a torture chamber crossed with a cathedral. New machines hummed with electrical power. Banks of monitors displayed brainwave patterns, hormone cascades, neural firing sequences, the complete breakdown of human physiology. At the center of it all stood what looked like an electric chair merged with a weightlifting apparatus. "What is that?" I asked, though my voice sounded strange, deeper, more guttural than before. "Neural override integration system," Dr. Mueller said, running his pale fingers along its metal surface. "Today we remove the final biological limiters. Your pain receptors, your self-preservation instincts, your emotional attachments. Everything that makes you weak and human." I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt anticipation. The thing I was becoming craved this final transformation. "Your friend, Mr. Columbia, has been asking questions," Dr. Mueller continued as he prepared his injections. Syringes filled with substances that glowed in the laboratory light. "He's quite persistent. Apparently he's concerned about your deteriorating mental state." Franco, I hadn't spoken to him in days. The thought of his worried face filled me with rage rather than guilt. "He doesn't understand," I said. "No, he doesn't. None of them do. They're trapped by human limitations while you're transcending them. Today, we sever those last pathetic connections completely." The injection burned like liquid fire, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. My vision sharpened until I could see individual dust motes floating in the air. My hearing became so acute I could distinguish between the electrical signatures of different machines. Every nerve in my body felt hypercharged. Reidido explode into action. "Beautiful," Dr. Mueller murmured, watching his monitors. "Your neural activity is off the charts. Adrenaline production at 5 times normal. Growth hormone cascades beyond anything I've recorded that you're becoming magnificent." He strapped me into the apparatus, metal restraints that felt more like a throne than bondage. Electrodes attached to my temples, my spine, my major muscle groups. The moment he activated the system, electricity coursed through me with the power of a lightning storm. But this time was different. Instead of the localized stimulation I'd grown accustomed to, this felt like my entire nervous system was being rewritten. I could feel neurons firing in patterns that had never existed before, neural pathways blazing into existence with each electrical pulse. The human nervous system uses approximately 10% of its potential, Dr. Mueller said, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "We're going to access the remaining 90%. The world exploded into sensation. I could feel every molecule of air touching my skin. I could hear heartbeats, footsteps, conversations from blocks away. My muscles swelled beyond anything natural, fed me chemicals and electrical stimulation that forced impossible growth. "Now," Dr. Mueller commanded, "lift." The barbell before me was loaded with weight I couldn't calculate, plates stacked so high they disappeared into the ceiling. 1,000 pounds, maybe more, enough to crush any human who attempted it. I gripped the bar and lifted. The weight rose smoothly, easily, as if it were made of foam. My body was operating on pure electrical impulse now, every muscle fiber firing simultaneously with mechanical precision. I wasn't just lifting, I was demonstrating that physics had become optional. 1,200 pounds, Dr. Mueller breathed. Impossible. Beautiful. You've transcended every human limitation. But something was wrong. As I held the weight aloft, I could feel something breaking inside me. Not physically, something deeper. Memories were fragmenting, dissolving like sugar and acid. I tried to remember my mother's face and found only static. My childhood home had become a gray blur. Even Meow name felt foreign on my tongue. What's happening to me? I asked, but my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. You're being born, Dr. Mueller said. The weak man you are is dying. What remains will be pure will, pure strength, pure perfection. I dropped the weight, and it crashed to the floor with enough force to crack the concrete. But I barely noticed. I was staring at my hands, which looked like they belonged to a machine rather than a living being. The veins stood out like cables. My fingers moved with mechanical precision. When I made a fist, the sound was like metal grinding against metal. I can't remember, I said, panic creeping into my voice. I can't remember who I was. You were no one, Dr. Mueller said. A farm boy from Austria who dreamed of greatness. Now you are greatness itself. The laboratory door burst open and Franco ran in, his face a mask of desperate concern. Arnold, I've been looking everywhere for you. Jesus Christ, what is this place? I turned to look at him, and I could see the horror in his eyes. Whatever he saw in my face made him take a step backward. Arnold, he whispered, is that really you? Was it? I tried to remember our friendship, our training sessions, the jokes we'd shared. But those memories felt like someone else's dreams, fading even as I grasped for them. Get out, I said, and my voice carried harmonics that made the laboratory equipment vibrate. You don't belong here. Neither do you, Franco shouted, moving closer despite his obvious fear. Look at yourself. You're not human anymore. Your skin is gray, your eyes are black, and you're talking like a machine. What has this maniac done to you? Dr. Mueller stepped between us. Mr. Columbu, I'm afraid you're interrupting a delicate procedure. Mr. Schwarzenegger is in the middle of his final transformation. Transformation into what? Franco demanded. He looks like a corpse. Arnold, please remember who you are. Remember your family, your dreams, your friends. You're losing yourself to this madness. His words triggered something deep in the electrical storm of my rewired brain. For a moment, I could see flashes of my former life. Lifting with Franco at Gold's Gym, laughing over dinner, the simple joy of friendship and competition. The human warmth I'd once known. Franco, I whispered, and for a moment I sounded like myself again. Yes, he said, stepping closer. It's me, your friend. We can fix this. Whatever he's done to you, we can fix it. But Dr. Mueller activated something on his control panel, and electricity coursed through the electrodes still attached to my body. The human moment vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. There is nothing to fix, I said, my voice returning to that mechanical tone. I am what I was meant to become. You are irrelevant. Franco's face crumpled with grief. Arnold, please. I know you're still in there somewhere. Fight this. Fight him. Fight. I laughed, and the sound made the equipment spark and hiss. I have transcended the need to fight. I have become victory itself. No, Franco said, tears streaming down his face. You've become nothing. A hollow shell filled with chemicals and electricity. The Arnold I knew would never abandon his humanity for muscle and trophies. Something snapped inside my rewired brain. Rage flooded through me. Not human anger, but something pure and destructive. How dare this weak, limited being judge me? How dare he try to drag me back down to his level? I moved faster than thought, crossing the distance between us before Franco could even register the motion. My hand closed around his throat and lifted him off the ground. The strength in my grip could have crushed his windpipe like paper. "You are nothing," I said, staring into his terrified eyes. "You are weak. You are human. You are beneath them." Franco gasped for breath, his hands clawing uselessly at my arm. But in his eyes, even as he suffocated, I saw something that pierced through the electrical storm in my mind. Not fear, but pity. He wasn't afraid of me. He was mourning me. "Arnold," he wheezed with his remaining breath. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry we lost you." The words hit me like a physical blow. For one terrible moment, I saw myself through his eyes, a gray-skinned monster with dead black eyes, holding my best friend by the throat while a mad scientist watched with satisfaction. I saw what I had become, what I had traded my humanity for. And in that moment of clarity, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the treatments began: horror at my own actions. I released Franco, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing. I stared at my hands, these mechanical, inhuman things that had nearly murdered my closest friend. "What have I done?" I whispered. "You've chosen strength over weakness," Dr. Mueller said calmly. "Evolution over stagnation. Perfection over humanity. The transformation is nearly complete." But the moment of human recognition had damaged something in the electrical patterns of my brain. I could feel systems crashing, neural pathways sparking and failing. The careful architecture of my enhancement was collapsing. "Something's wrong," I said, as pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced shot through my skull. "Something's breaking." Dr. Mueller's eyes widened as he studied his monitors. "The neural integration is destabilizing. Your emotional response is causing cascade failures throughout your modified nervous system." The pain intensified, feeling like my brain was being torn apart by electrical storms. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my head as sparks literally flew from the electrodes still attached to my body. "Fix it," I screamed. "I can't," Dr. Mueller said, for the first time showing real emotion: panic. "The modifications require complete psychological integration. Your attachment to human concepts like friendship and guilt is causing the entire system to reject itself." Franco struggled to his feet, one hand massaging his bruised throat. "Good," he croaked. "Maybe there's still something human left in you after all." But I could feel that humanity slipping away as the electrical chaos in my brain intensified. My vision was fragmenting, showing me multiple realities simultaneously. In one, I was Arnold Schwarzenegger, Austrian farm boy turned champion. In another, I was something that had never been human, a creature of metal and electricity wearing human skin. "Choose," Dr. Mueller said urgently. "Accept the transformation completely and survive as something beyond human limitations, or cling to your weakness and let your enhanced nervous system burn itself out." I looked at Franco, who was watching me with a mixture of hope and terror. I could still feel his throat in me hands, still see the trust and friendship in his eyes, even as I'd nearly killed him. I could remember, dimly, what it felt like to care about something other than victory and dominance. But I could also feel the incredible power coursing through my enhanced body, the strength that made me capable of feats no human had ever achieved. The competition was only days away, and with these modifications, I wouldn't just win, I would redefine what victory meant. The choice should have been obvious. I had sacrificed everything for this transformation. I had endured weeks of agony, allowed my humanity to be stripped away piece by piece, all for this moment of transcendence. So why, as I knelt there with electricity arcing between my fingers and my friend's blood on my hands, did he finally understand that I had made the most terrible mistake of my life? The realization hit me with devastating clarity. I had become exactly what I'd always feared. Not the greatest bodybuilder who ever lived, but a monster wearing the face of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And as the electrical storm in my brain reached critical mass, as Dr. Mueller's monitors began exploding in showers of sparks, as Franco backed away in horror from what I was becoming, I opened my mouth to scream, and the sound that emerged was no longer human at all. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, my body feeling like it had been torn apart and poorly reassembled. The first thing I saw was Franco sitting in a chair beside me, his neck wrapped in bandages, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and grief. "You're awake," he said quietly, not moving from his chair. There was a distance in his voice I'd never heard before. Not anger, but something worse. Wariness. Fear. What happened? My voice came out as a whisper, raw and broken. When I tried to sit up, pain shot through every muscle in my body, as if my nervous system was short-circuiting. "Dr. Mueller's facility burned down," Franco said, still not looking directly at me. "Electrical fire," they said, started in his laboratory. They found his body in the ruins, but—" He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "Arnold, they said he'd been dead for hours before the fire started." His heart just stopped like his body gave out. I tried to remember those final moments, the electrical storms in my brain, the monitors exploding, then human scream that had torn from my throat. But it was all fragments, like trying to recall a nightmare that kept slipping away. "The investigators couldn't explain the damage," Franco continued. "Metal twisted like it had been in a hurricane. Computer equipment fused into glass. And in the center of it all, a chair melted into something that didn't look like metal anymore. My body. I looked down at my arms, my chest. The impossible muscle mass was gone, shrunk back, tosamething closer to normal human proportions. But the definition remained strange, unnatural. My veins still stood out like cables, and when I moved, I could feel something wrong in the way my muscles contracted, too smooth, too coordinated, like there were still traces of machinery in my biology. "How long have I been here?" I asked. 3 days. The doctors don't understand how you survived. Your blood work showed traces off compounds they'd never seen before. Your neural activity was, they called it unprecedented. They wanted to run more tests, but I told them you needed rest." Franco finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes broke something inside me that Dr. Mueller's machines never could. He was looking at me like he wasn't sure I was still human. Like he was waiting to see if the thing that had nearly killed him was still lurking behind my eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, and the words felt inadequate for what I'd done. "Franco, I'm so sorry. I almost—" "You did," he said simply. "You almost killed me, your best friend, with your bare hands, and the look in your eyes when you did it." He touched his bandaged throat. "You weren't you anymore, Arnold. You were something else wearing your face." The Mr. Olympia competition had been held while I lay unconscious. Sergio Oliva had won his 6th title. When Franco told me, I waited to feel the crushing disappointment, the rage at missing my chance at greatness. Instead, I felt nothing but relief. The obsession that had driven me into Dr. Mueller's hands seemed as foreign now as a fever dream. "The worst part," Franco continued, "was that for a moment, just before you collapsed, I saw you recognize what you'd become. The horror in your eyes when you realized you were choking your friend, that's when I knew some part of you was still fighting to get out." Over the following weeks, as I slowly regained my strength, I began to understand the true scope of what had been done to me. The superhuman power was gone, but traces of the modification remained. My reflexes were still too fast, my pain tolerance unnaturally high. Sometimes, when I concentrated, I could feel electrical patterns dancing along my nerves. Most disturbing were the moments of emotional flatness, periods where I would feel nothing at all, as if some essential human circuit had been burned out. I could go for hours without experiencing joy, sadness, or fear, operating on pure mechanical efficiency until something, usually Franco's voice or a memory of my family, would snap me back to feeling human again. The nightmares never stopped. I would dream of that laboratory, of lifting impossible weights while my humanity drained away like blood from an open wound. I would see Dr. Mueller's pale eyes and hear his voice telling me I was becoming magnificent. I would wake screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, Franco shaking me back to consciousness. "You talk in your sleep," Franco told me one morning. Not in English, not in German. Something else entirely, like the sounds machines would make if they could speak. I decided to leave Los Angeles. The city held too many memories of what I'd almost become. Franco helped me pack, though our friendship would never fully recover from what I'd done. Trust, once broken by the hands of a monster, doesn't simply rebuild itself. "Will you be okay?" he asked as I loaded my car. "I don't know," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in months. "I don't know if what's left off is enough to build a life on." He nodded, understanding. The Arnold I knew died in that laboratory. Maybe what comes next will be better. Maybe it'll be worse. But it'll be real, and that's something. I drove north, eventually settling in a small town where no one knew who I was or what I'd been. I got a job in construction, using my still considerable strength for something constructive instead of destructive. I avoided gyms, avoided competitions, avoided anything that might reawaken the hunger that had nearly consumed me. But late at night, when the world was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I would sometimes feel it stirring, that cold ambition, that desire to transcend human limitations. In those moments, I would catch myself staring at my reflection, looking for signs that the thing I'd become was still lurking beneath the surface. Years later, when I finally returned to bodybuilding, when I won those additional Mr. Olympia titles and went on to Hollywood success, people would ask me about the secret to my achievements. They wanted to know how I developed such discipline, such unwavering focus, such an ability to push beyond normal human limits. I would tell them it was Austrian work ethic, or visualization techniques, or simple determination. I never told them the truth, that everything I accomplished afterward was fueled not by the desire for greatness, but by the terror of what I might become if I ever lost control again. Because the real secret wasn't that Dr. Mueller had made me superhuman for a brief, terrible time. The real secret was that traces of his modifications never fully left my system. Even now, decades later, I can feel them, subtle enhancements to my nervous system, microscopic improvements to my muscle fiber recruitment, tiny electrical patterns that shouldn't exist in normal human biology. I became successful not because of what Dr. Mueller gave me, but because of what he took away. My innocence, my belief that any price was worth paying for victory. Every achievement after that laboratory was earned by a man who knew exactly how close he'd come to losing his soul. Sometimes in quiet moments, I wonder if that was his true experiment all along. Not to create a superhuman, but to create a human being who understood the value of his humanity precisely because it almost lost it. The burned ruins of his facility were eventually cleared away and turned into a parking lot. But sometimes when I drive past that spot in Beverly Hills, I swear I can still smell the acrid scent of melted metal and electrical fire. And in those moments, I remember the lesson that cost me everything to learn. There are some peaks that aren't meant to be climbed, some limits that exist not to be broken, but to preserve the very thing that makes us human. The man who transcends those boundaries doesn't become more than human. He becomes something far less. I learned to live with what I'd become, to build a life on the fragments of the man I'd almost destroyed, but I never forgot the feeling of my friend's throat in my hands, or the sound of my own voice speaking in frequencies that belong to machines rather than men. And late at night, when the world is dark and still, I sometimes catch my reflection moving a split second before I do, as if there's still something artificial in the neural pathways Dr. Mueller rewired so long ago. In those moments, I'm reminded that some transformations can never be completely undone. The monster I became may be sleeping now, but it's never truly gone. It waits in the spaces between mythos, in the electrical patterns that shouldn't exist in human brains, in the perfect muscle memory of what it felt like to be something other than mortal. And every day, I choose to remain human, not because it's easy, but because I remember exactly what the alternative costs. That choice, made fresh each morning when I look in the mirror and see only Arnold Schwarzenegger looking back, is the only victory that has ever truly mattered. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you'll always be with us discovering the secrets and untold sides of the most famous lives in history.